Perfect Turd Podcast, episode 141. Lamar, we have a very special guest, and I'm excited because I love this story.
We have Matthew Klein. He has a new comic coming out called Crashing. Sir, how are you today?
I am thrilled to be here with the two of you gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's start not just with the comic book, but start off with comics in general. How did you get into comic books?
So I got into comic books trying to impress a girl.
It happens to the best of us.
So I grew up on Batman, TAS. I grew up on Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, all that stuff. It wasn't until college that I really started to read the single issues, and it was because there was a really cute girl down the hall who was reading the 52 Weekly series, and I really wanted something to talk to her about. And so that's when I started reading graphic novels and getting into comics. And then when I was coming out of graduate school, I needed a job, and a director I was working with, because I come from theater, her boyfriend, now husband, was the manager at a comic shop called Forbidden Planet out here in Union Square. It's been around over 40 years at this point. And so I worked there for about 5 years. And then I moved on, and a buddy of mine I was working with recommended me for a sales job at Valiant Entertainment. He was like, well, they came to me, but I want to keep writing comics. I think that's my path. And he was right, because his name's Matthew Rosenberg, who just got that Wildcat series announced, and Punisher runs and X-Men runs and everything. I love Rosenberg. And so I went to work for Valiant, and over 6 years, I worked my way up to being the vice president of sales and marketing, and I was going to 20 conventions a year at one point. Wow. I visited over 250 comic shops in the US, Canada, the UK.
Wow.
And then as of April of last year, I moved over, and I'm now working for Penguin Random House, and I'm on the US comics market sales team. That's what I do for my day job before I started writing this series for IDW.
Well, let's get into Crashing, because I love this. Could you just tell the audience the basic premise, and then we're going to dive deeper into this?
Sure. So you follow an everyday hero who is tasked with saving the lives of Boston's greatest superhero and greatest supervillain in the same day and night. And in the process is pushed to a breaking point where she is jeopardizing 7 years of sobriety. And out of that fateful choice, the question is, in her obsession, her addiction to save everyone, can she also learn how to save herself? And that is really the crux of the story of this series.
So for me, I describe it as like ER with superheroes. Like,
Yeah.
Do you have any experience like working with ERs and everything like that? Or is this just coming out of anything?
Okay. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. What I did was, honestly, like Rose Osler, the star of the book, she came to me. I got really inspired in 2020 when we were seeing all those daily testimonials from doctors and nurses who were talking about the overwhelming odds they were facing treating COVID every single day. And so the idea of Rose really comes out of that, this idea of an everyday hero who is pushed to a breaking point, who has suffered her own trauma and has to fight these demons in the midst of this overwhelming, massive conflict that is way bigger than her. And yet she's the one who's tasked with having to find order within this chaos and bring that sense of organization and save people's lives in the midst of putting her own at risk day in and day out. And so that's really where this sort of came from more than anything else.
It's not like your average superhero stuff. You have superheroes in this. You have this question of ethics, save good guys, save bad guys, and she's a flawed character. That's great. How do you balance all of that, though?
And that's it, right? How do you and the secret, spoiler, she doesn't, right? Like that's that's where it comes in, So somebody dealing with that sort of conflict was really appealing to me. I thought that was something that you didn't see a lot of in this genre. Like, I'm a fan of like Astro City or street level characters, and it's like, well, what happens when you look at the bigger picture of these superpowers from someone who is flawed, who is just an everyday person, who's tasked with something very big and much bigger than themselves?
Well, that's very deep, because we got to know, because we are in the era of like superheroes and everything like that. Being made in the movies, being made in the shows, you seem to be very connected to this character of Rose. If they made a show or a movie, they ask you, who would you want to cast?
That's a great, I haven't gotten that question yet. So you got me a little bit here. You got me a little bit. I mean, give me Tessa Thompson. Like, honestly, like, I think she'd make a great Rose. Just somebody who could bring a little bit of like dry sense of humor to it, but absolutely grounded and down to earth, and like take any shit on the outside, but could absolutely be freaking out like in the private moments. I think she'd be fantastic in something like this.
Okay, nice. Well, we're gonna have to hit up Tessa Thompson.
Let her know I said,
let her know, hey, read this when it comes out.
Is that something on the horizon though? Maybe this would be a great show. Is that?
Thank you. I mean, we all think so. That's really an IDW's court. Like, they've got all the negotiating powers. So I leave it up to their very capable hands. And if something happens, that's awesome. And we'd be super down for it. And we certainly have a ton more stories we could tell in this world. Like, that's the beauty of it. When you get to the end of the series, you're going to be like, oh, wow, they could go in this direction. They go that direction. They can go this direction. They go anywhere.
I feel like, when we're reading this, it's like her personal story. So you could maybe like, okay, you have a character that comes in, you follow them and all this kind of stuff. But would you rather this comic just follow her or just branch off into different things?
It depends on the day of the week for me. Like, I could go the Astro City route, like I mentioned earlier, where like every arc is sort of a different character set within this world. And you could have these little touchstones of how it goes back to Rose and her story at some point. Her husband, I've got an arc in mind for her husband, who, like, we don't even touch on the fact that like we're dealing with like this super powered paranoia going on in this world, and people's healthcare and basic rights are being threatened, which ended up being way more timely than I ever expected when we started working on this thing. But you could get into the politics of that. You could get into his story. You could get into some of the patients that you're going to meet throughout this thing, and their story that all sort of ties back into Rose's story a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Like, yeah, you could do the whole thing, like the villains. What sparked the paranoia against people with powers in general? I guess it's just a fear of different people being different, I guess, right?
I mean, it's everything we got going on the last couple of years. Like, I mean, you got so much social outrage happening. This is just my way of sort of finding a way to bring elements of that into this story. 108,000 people died of overdose over a 12-month period, which is the most in history since they've been dealing with that statistic and tracking it. Like, it's everywhere. Why are we not talking about it more in comics? Why are we not using art to bring more awareness to it? So, like, for me, it was a no-brainer. If I'm going to set this character with a real-world problem, then what are the other real-world problems that are going on simultaneously? Social justice is absolutely one of them. Disenfranchising a minority right now, that's one of them. So, yeah, in this case, the minority are people with powers, but that's just a lens for everyone else out there who's dealing with this stuff right now.
Very true. Now, the process of getting this made, like, the process of writing and then finding the illustrator. Can you tell us that part of, like, creating this?
One of my dear friends who I adore is named Heather Anto. She's the editor on this book, and she's an editor at IDW. And I wanted to work on a pitch, and she was very familiar with my writing and always said, hire me on to work on the pitch with you and then pitch it wherever you want to go. So I was like, okay, I'm finally ready. I worked in theater as a playwright for a decade before this. Then I reached out to some friends and I said, I need an artist. Here's what the pitch is. Who could you recommend? And a wonderful guy named Ryan Cady, he recommended Morgan Beam, who's the artist on the book. And I met with Morgan, and Morgan just got it from the get-go. She understood the tone of this thing. She latched on to Rose. She latched on to what this story was, not just what the plot is. And so we put it all together. We worked with Heather to really get this down to about a 5-page pitch. It was a 1-page with all the who, what's, where and when. And then it was a 4-page outline. And then we wrote a script, and we had Morgan draw the first 9 pages. And then as we were working on it, Heather got hired at IDW, and she was like, this is good enough. I would be down to pitch this for IDW. And I was like, well, I'm not going to stop you. So by all means. And she came on board. We brought everybody with us, basically, and it's been just a blast ever since.
You have a unique perspective, being not only on the creative side, but on the sales side, what do you think is the future for comics? Is there something new on the horizon, or what's going on?
Manga, baby. It's all manga.
Really?
Manga is the biggest selling category out there, period. It dwarfs anything in terms of growth for single issue comics. Single issue comics are a flat line over the last 5 years.
Wow.
And the reason they've stayed a flat line is because you've had a lot of retailer exclusive variants that are keeping that at a certain level. Manga is doubling, tripling in size every single year. That is where it's at. Manga is your growth. If you're a comic shop and you are not selling manga, you are losing money. You are literally leaving money on the table. The other place, kids' books. Kids' graphic novels are getting bigger and bigger. And I'm not talking just YA. I'm not talking 12, 13, 14. I'm talking 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. Those books are going way, 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 way up in terms of sales right now. They are on the rise. YA also going up, just not at the same rate as manga or middle grade, but it's also on the rise. You got titles like Lore Olympus. So it's all manga. Manga is where it's at. Graphic novels are where it's at. Kids' books are where it's at. Those are the major, major growth categories. Independent books like Crashing, most retailers will buy high on number one, and then they drop their orders and they wait for the trade paperback. And that's what happens. Issues 2, 3, 4, 5, those are the hardest things to sell right now if you're not Batman or Spider-Man. You've really got books that do really well on issue 1, then they drop 70 to 80% on issue 2, and then they stay that way until the first trade paperback comes out. And the trade paperback is where the majority of the sales are actually going to get made. So you have to make all your money back on the first issue to fund the rest of the series, basically, is the new economics of it.
I was about to make my own comic about the life of Lamar here, but I guess maybe it's not worth it.
Make it a graphic novel. You'll get more sales.
Mustache Man, I was going to call it.
Why don't we make a comic about you, Joe?
Music PD. That's it.
There you go.
Boom. There you go.
That's why we need a professional, Lamar.
Yeah. We don't know. We just be throwing stuff out there. But going back to what you said about manga, because it seems like the problem is with like DC and Marvel. I guess not the problem. They're making billions of dollars. But when you're saying like new things, manga is always like trying new things and stuff like that. Like it seems like it at least.
Well, but also, what did we just say? Manga has anime.
Yeah.
Manga has built-in fan bases. They have other media happening all the time. Crunchyroll, Funimation, Netflix now. Like they're all carrying it. You look at Dark Horse Comics. You want to know the biggest selling Dark Horse book out there? I'll give you one guess. It's Berserk. Like that is that is the biggest selling title that's out there, man.
Going off of this idea, because we're like a B-movie podcast. I was wondering, they usually take comic books, make them into movies. Would it be profitable or feasible to go the opposite way, like take a Tremors and make it into a comic book, something like that?
They've been doing it forever, man. Yeah. I mean, you look at Star Trek, right? How many Star Trek comics are there? Look at Star Wars. Big Trouble in Little China had his own comic a couple of years ago, and it had like 15, 20 issues.
Yeah.
That was going everywhere. Power Rangers, right?
Like, Power Rangers.
Yeah.
The key right now, though, is like the way it hits is the nostalgia factor, right? It's the people who were kids when that media was coming out and now have disposable income, who want to reconnect with their childhood. And that's why comic shops did so well during the pandemic. Everybody was stuck at home. So you know what people wanted? Something that spoke to that inner child when they were happy and the world was safe. It's like, there you go. And that's why bookstores and comic book shops are damn near recession proof. You saw it in 2008. You saw it in 2020. Most comic shops had the best year in existence in 2021.
Somebody's got to make a Walker Texas Ranger comic. Like, how did nobody make that yet? Has it?
I gotta look it up and see if, like, if they made comics for the show Chuck and Heroes, I'm sure there's a Walker Texas Ranger book out there somewhere.
Right? There's got to be.
Then they're gonna make the movie from the comic book, and then people are gonna forget that there was an actual show, and then people are gonna be like, "This is so new." No,
I saw a great tweet the other day about someone who was like showing The Ring to their like 12-year-olds for the first time. And they had to keep stopping it to explain anything a kid from the 90s would have been like, oh, there's that, oh, a VCR, yeah, that's right. And like, oh, recording something on your TV, right? There was no TiVo, there was no DVR, there was no nothing, like all these sorts of things. So, you know.
Well, right on, man. So before we let you go, where can everyone find you, social media and all that? And also, when is the release date for the comic hitting the stores?
Sure. So we are T-minus 1 month from the release date of the comic. It is September 21st, Crashing #1. Tell your local comic shop. If you want your favorite comic to survive, the most important thing you can do is let your local comic shop know you want it in advance so that they order it. So many comic book shops base their orders based on pre-orders. So, and they have formulas. If 5 people want a comic and put a pre-order on their pull list, they will order 15 to 20 copies of that thing in total. If no one does, they might just order 5 for the shelf, and that's it. So, like, if you want to support your favorite comic book or your favorite comic book creator, sign up for a pull list, pre-order that thing. That is the #1 way you can guarantee the comic you love will stay in print and being published. So September 21st, you can find me at Matthew Klein 316 on Twitter, Mac the Knife 1116 on Instagram. I post about comics. I post about pro wrestling. I post late night rom-coms that I'm watching from the 90s. Like, by all means, we'll get on there. We'll have some fun.
Awesome, man. Well, we're looking forward to it. And thank you very much.
Thank you for
September
being on
21st,
our show.
everyone.
Yes. It was a pleasure. Anytime, give me a call. Would love to come back on.
So. Thank you, man.
Awesome,
Appreciate
man.
it.
Peace.